Hey everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and in this video, I am going to cover some information on a powerful, sacred, ecologically sensitive medicinal plant, and that is Osha. Now, Osha is a Native American plant that grows in the Rocky Mountains and in the Southwest, and it grows at high elevations between 7 and 10,000 feet. So to the best of my knowledge, it's never been successfully cultivated. In fact, I've had a couple of friends of mine who've tried to move it from where it grows and transplant it into their yard, and it was not successful. And what I have come to believe is that there is a deep mycelium that this plant needs in those high elevations to help it grow and to help it thrive. And if you transplant a plant into soil or way different elevations, it just kind of goes, meh, I don't think so. So this is a plant that I have personally known about and used for decades. I love it. And it's mostly known for helping the respiratory system, especially acute things that happen in the respiratory system, the lungs and the breathing and all of that. In fact, about 10 years ago when I formulated our lung blend, Osha was in my mind top of the list of why I needed to create something for the lungs, because I've known and used this plant for a long time. Now, there's a lot of amazing history with Osha because it's been used by the Native Americans for so long, and it has a lot of tradition, a lot of sacredness. It's not something you want to just go in and clear out a whole space. In fact, I have a friend who has property, a big piece of property up past where I live, up in the mountains, and it grows on her property. And she even said, you don't want to go and clear out a whole area. You only want to take about 1 in 10 plants, because this is a plant that takes a long time to grow, and it's the root that you get out of the ground. And that's where the medicinal properties are. In fact, I've got a couple of small Osha roots here that I keep on I have a little altar over here with some lomatium, some devil's club, and some Osha root. These are really, really sacred plants that actually I feel don't just benefit the body, but they benefit the environment because of how sacred they are. In fact, this is some of the traditional use of many, many people over the years, is it'll clear out the space from what people believe simply by being in the space. In fact, you can see this is a dried Osha root. Here's a little piece of dried Osha root. And these I've had for a few years. I just love the sacredness of them. They're perfect on my little herb altar over here. And even after all these years, I know that if I chewed on this, it would still taste very, very powerful, and it would still be very potent. This is something that, when you taste this fresh, you only need to take a tiny, tiny bit of it. If you were to get a fresh root out, kind of wash the dirt off it, and just take a tiny, tiny piece of this and chew on it, especially if you have a respiratory issue. This would be something really, really awesome to do your own due diligence and do some deeper research on this. In fact, when I formulated my lung blend, Osha was at the top of the list, and I added like lobelia and mullein and other very lung supportive herbs. But like I said, the lung blend was formulated because of my pure love of Osha. In fact, Osha can be made into several things. One of my favorite ways is in a tincture. You could make it into a decoction or a tea. You can even use Osha root as a poultice for skin wounds, that's what it's been used for. Now, it does have a common name, which is bear root, because what the Native Americans and the people who lived in these high altitudes discovered over the years is that when the bears would come out of hibernation, they would dig up this root and eat it. It was so densely nutritious, and it also helped to pull them out of their hibernation. If you think about, a bear hibernating in a cave all winter long. But if you've tasted any of these roots, especially Osha, when it's fresh, you can literally feel it open up your lungs. In fact, what I like to do with my lung blend is squeeze up like a half dropper. And instead of putting it in water, I like to put it right in my mouth, because as soon as I swallow it, I literally feel my airways open. In fact, I keep a bottle of lung blend right by my desk. And I thought, okay, while I do this video about Osha, I took a big dropper full of this and sat with it for a minute. I closed my eyes. I meditated a little bit, and I could just feel the power of these herbs in this blend. And in particular, the Osha, because it is so distinctive. In fact, it's in the carrot/parsley family. And this is one of the things that can be a little bit tricky when you're trying to identify it, because it is very easily confused with a couple of very poisonous plants. One is poison hemlock, which is fatal. Part of its name is poison hemlock. So it looks similar to Osha on the top of the ground. And also water hemlock, which can be very toxic to humans. So they look similar to Osha. You have to really know what you're doing when you're going out and looking to identify some of these plants. So also one of my very favorite ways, my friend that actually has property where this grows taught me to use Osha is this. You basically dig up a few roots, and these roots are not ginormous. You can see this, I've seen ones bigger than this, but this is pretty common and this is pretty typical. So it's not that big. And now this is dried. It's a little bit bigger when it's not dried. But when you have fresh Osha root, you basically wash all the dirt off it. And then there's kind of an outer layer, the dark layer that's on there. And you kind of, peel that off while it's still fresh. And then you cut it into small chunks, put it into a jar, and then you're only going to be able to fill up a small jar unless you have a bunch. And then what you do is you fill the jar with local raw honey. And honey acts as a preservative. And then it also is one of those things that helps the medicine go down. So if you think about Osha root, how strong it is, if you've ever tasted this root, like I said, you only need to taste a teeny tiny bit, and it would just open those airways. But then you put it in honey, and you let it sit there until you're ready to go get some. And you can start eating this or using this medicinally right away. So you've got a little jar. I actually had one for a long, long time, and it's gone now because this was years ago. I did this with my friend, and you just get a little tiny tip of a chunk of Osha root with the honey. And if you had any type of lung issues, or like some cold or flu or something that kind of settled in your lungs, Osha root is just one of those plants that when you learn about it, it's such a special sacred plant, but it must be harvested and used with care. In fact, I found some beautiful kind of mystical, magical folklore based on some indigenous work that, when people would write down the history of the way this plant was used. This is a plant that demands respect. This is, and the plant will give you respect back by healing you if you use respect while you're not just harvesting it, but working with it, storing it, and using it. Okay. So what a lot of people suggest, in fact, a lot of herbalists will actually have some alternates to Osha root, because Osha root is on the endangered species list. And it's not one that, like I said, has been successfully cultivated, at least to the best of my knowledge. If someone's been able to do that, that would be amazing. But it actually makes sense that some of these really sacred, powerful plants stay where they are in their environment. As humans, we respect the cycle, we respect the earth, and we use these as Mother Nature intended. And a lot of these are used sparingly, but the cool thing is you don't need much. Now, some of the herbs that are used in place of Osha, especially if it's not available, because you can't get it all the time. And it is a very, very expensive root to purchase. So when I get it to put it into my lung formula, it's a very, very expensive component in this, and rightly so. It should be. Okay. So echinacea and angelica, thyme, and licorice root are some of the plants that have been used in place of Osha if Osha is not available. Or if maybe a place has been, it's been harvested, and then you simply respect the land and leave what's there alone. Now, like I said, Osha is in the parsley slash carrot family, and can be very easily confused with other plants. It's got parsley-like leaves, which are also edible and taste a little bit like celery. If you were to munch on the leaves, they actually taste more like celery than parsley. And they've got this beautiful white umbrella-like cluster of white flowers that is on the top. So you can identify it if you know what you're looking for, because poison hemlock and water hemlock look almost exactly the same. Now, the time that you harvest Osha root is pretty much whenever you harvest other medicinal roots. And that is in the fall or the late fall, after the first frost, typically. Because what happens is all of the medicinal properties that have been growing the leaves and growing the flowers, the leaves and everything goes dormant. We have a first frost that hits, and then all of those properties are now concentrated in the root. And it's a very, very important part of knowing when to harvest powerful root medicine. Okay. Now, there's a whole beautiful list of health benefits that Osha contains. And just know that the information I share with you is not meant to be medical advice. This is meant to entertain and educate you only. You should always, always do your own due diligence when it comes to using plants and plant medicine for yourself and your family. So just know that this is just based on my own experience, and this is just meant to entertain you. Okay. So my favorite primary use of Osha root is for respiratory support. And this is what it's really, really well known for. In fact, if you think about it, it grows between 7,000 and 10,000 feet up in the mountains, and it's really good for your lungs. So that's a clue if you think about it. Because when you are up in those higher elevations, the air is thinner and you need strong lungs. So that's such a big clue from Mother Nature. And I love that because there's always these hints that if we pay attention, it makes perfect sense. Mother Nature is designed so perfectly, and we just need to tap in, educate ourselves, tune into the wisdom of what this beautiful earth gives us. Here's what I wrote. Osha is best known for supporting the lungs and the upper respiratory tract. It helps loosen thick mucus, soothe irritated airways, and promote easier breathing during colds, flu, bronchitis, and altitude-related breathing stress. Okay, so think about that. Okay, it's also a natural expectorant. So the aromatic resins and the volatile oils stimulate the expulsion of mucus from the lungs, making coughs more productive rather than suppressing them unnaturally. So think about that statement right there. When you get an over-the-counter medication to suppress a cough, that's unnatural. So there's natural resins and compounds in Osha root. You can literally feel what this does for your lungs. It's absolutely amazing. It's got antiviral activity, antibacterial support, immune system stimulation, anti-inflammatory effects, especially for the lungs, throat and voice support, digestive aid, anti-spasmodic action, circulatory stimulant, pain relief, wound and infection support, and the list is going on, right? Antifungal properties, altitude adaptation support. So it helps support your lungs at higher altitudes. And I've personally experienced this as a person who's a mountain climber. My lungs are typically acclimated, but I've had small times in my life when I've lived at sea level and I've lived at places with just low altitude. And then because of what I know about plants and plant medicine and how to use them and when, I've experienced what it feels like to use Osha root when I'm in a high altitude that's higher than where I normally live, okay, which is amazing. Nervous system grounding, detoxification support, oral health support. And this is something, chewing on a little piece of Osha root, for oral support. Think about antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. Think about all the things, even just the bacteria that live in your mouth. It's almost like chewing on a clove. A clove is really good for antibacterial in your mouth. So is Osha root. So oral support and protective and tonic use, so here's what I wrote. Beyond physical effects, Osha was carried or used ceremoniously for protection, endurance, and resilience, which basically really reflects its role as a holistic tonic for humans. Okay, which I think all of this is so absolutely amazing. Now, I found some really fun, kind of esoteric, mystical, magical. It's almost like it's not even really folklore, because to me, this is where the wisdom lives. The wisdom lives in these deep, rich traditions that have been not just passed on generation to generation to generation, but documented in these old texts and the notes written by the shamans. And this is really where the wisdom lives, okay? So it's not just a medicine, it's considered a guardian plant, a bridge between body, breath, and spirit. carrying the power of high places and animal friends. Just think about the bear that comes out of its cave. A bear will come out of hibernation, dig up an Osha root, and consume it because of what it does for those lungs that have been sitting in hibernation for all those months, right? So it's in folklore, it emphasizes respect, restraint, and relationship, not just casual use. This is not something you just use casually. So here's some really fun things that I found to share with you about Osha. This is a root that walks between worlds. It is said that Osha was never thought of as merely a plant, but a mountain spirit that allowed itself to be rooted. Okay? Healers may have believed it grew where the boundary between worlds was thin. So think about that. You have something between the worlds, the air is thin, where breath, weather, and spirit mingle. In this view, chewing Osha before ceremony wasn't about medicine alone, but about aligning one's inner breath with the breath of the mountains. It's so beautiful. And it's also known as the Bear's Covenant, which I love that I found this. A common imagined belief is that bears were not just users of Osha, but teachers of it. Some traditions may have held that humans were only allowed to use Osha after watching bears heal themselves. Okay, isn't that cool? Forming an unspoken covenant. We learn by watching. We are borrowing, not owning. We learn by watching. We are borrowing, not owning. And this is one of the things that I really love about when you dig into the deeper wisdom of plants and plant medicine, is this is not something for us to own. This is something for us to remember who we are, and to borrow and return. We get to return these gifts and be respectful of everything that we do with Mother Earth, because she will give to us abundantly. Abundantly. We don't have to go, we need to be scarce. It's about respect and abundance. The abundance always comes with the respect and with using things properly, how they're designed to be used, right? So then because of this, misuse of Osha was believed to anger the bear spirits, leading to sickness, disorientation, or loss of protection. Isn't that interesting? It's like, okay, if you disrespect this plant, there's a loss of protection. I think that's actually a good way that humans have been able to respect the plant without just going in and just over harvesting, right? So then Osha may have been used in these rites, okay? Calling back someone's last breath after trauma, strengthening the soul after long grief, and helping the dying breathe peacefully into the next world. Now, as I've studied different plants like Osha and different plants that affect the lungs and how our lungs heal, every part of our body regenerates. Some take 30 days, some take 7 years, like your bones take 7 years. You have all new bones in 7 years. Now your lungs take 6 to 8 months to completely regenerate and rejuvenate new lung tissue for you. And they also carry the emotion of sadness and grief. This is where you carry that emotion. And this is where Osha root was believed to call back someone's lost breath after trauma and strengthen the soul after long grief. And that makes such perfect sense. Like the weavings of these plants and how powerful they are and how they help human beings is really stunning if you think about it. If you even just take a moment and let that information and that knowledge just really settle into your intuition and settle into your gut feeling and settle into your soul, right? The belief is also that if the breath leaves the body unevenly, the spirit wanders, and Osha helps to guide it back. I mean, isn't that beautiful? Now, it's also known as fire in the root magic. Some mountain folk magic traditions later described Osha as containing hidden fire. Okay, because people chewed it before dangerous journeys. They carried it during storms or warfare, and they used it to wake up courage before initiation rites. Think about a lot of the initiation rites of the Native Americans. All the things that they did on the journey to becoming a man or on the journey to becoming a woman. This was a root that was carried on a lot of these initiation rites, the rites of passage as people are growing up. For thousands of years, this is how it happened. This fire was not destructive. It was an inner heat, the will to survive cold, fear, and illness. I mean, This is why this root sits over here on this little beautiful altar I have of just some of these really powerful plants that have a deep meaning for me. This is one of a handful of about six is all. Okay. Now, here's another thing that I found in the magical folklore of this plant. There are speculative accounts that Osha was carried to make hunters less visible to prey, confuse hostile spirits, and blur one's energetic outline while traveling. So it was known as an invisibility and boundary plant. So not literal invisibility, but spiritual obscurity. Okay, so think about that. As if the danger simply passed by without noticing. So that whatever danger there was, it passed by you without even noticing you. So it didn't make you invisible. It spiritually protected you. And this was a deep belief that the native and indigenous people had around this plant. Okay. It also was known as truth calling and oath medicine. Okay. So listen, this is really cool. Because it strengthens the throat and the voice, Osha may have been used to swear when swearing oaths, speaking before councils, and naming difficult truths. You know, that can be tough for all of us. And so this was something that actually aided in that because it was good for the voice and the throat. You know, amazing. The belief was this: lies spoken under Osha's influence would burn the speaker later, bringing illness or loss of voice. I love how they put this, because to me, this is like, this is really where the true power and the magic is. And, you know, I know there's a biological thing that this plant does. There's something that affects our biology on a very deep level. But when you add that, you know, we are spiritual beings. We're made of energy and frequency. And it all makes sense. It all ties together so perfectly and so powerfully if you look at it that way and you utilize it that way. Okay, that to me, this is where the fun lies. It's also known for its thunder and weather associations. Okay, so what I mean by that is this: growing high where the storms gather, Osha was sometimes known to as a thunder being, a wind spirit, or sky medicine because of how high it grew. Burning or carrying it during storms was thought to align a person with the storm rather than oppose it, which would reduce harm. Okay, because it can be kind of dangerous out there in the storms, you know, with, you know, lightning and maybe a lot of, you know, torrential rain and high winds and, you know, maybe a lot of snow. If you think about all the things that happened in a stormy situation in the mountains, you know, this was very much known as a protective plant. Now, there are some definitely, here's some things that were considered a sacred risk or a taboo, okay? In this tradition, Osha was dangerous not because it was toxic, but because it was aware. Okay, think about that. Osha was not dangerous because it was toxic. It was dangerous because as a plant, it was aware. Okay, so here's what I found about that. Taking too much weakened its magic, because this is a plant you only need a small amount of. Selling it carelessly emptied the root. So everything along the way must be done with care, and it must be done with deep respect for this plant and the land where it grows, okay? Using it without prayer made it mute. You know, there is something really beautiful about doing everything with intention, with love, and with a gratitude for what the plant gives us. You know, there is something about blessing a plant as it comes into our life to bless our health and bless us in protection for so many things. You know, there is a powerful layer that is added when a prayer is added and respect is given. Its power depended on relationship, not dosage. So again, a tiny amount. When I had that jar, in fact, just making this video and gathering this information, I need to get myself another jar of fresh chopped up Osha root and cover it with honey. I think I need to reach out to my friend and say, okay, you know, maybe in the fall, because I'm filming this video in January, and maybe this coming fall, I need to get myself another jar of Osha root with honey. That was a really fun thing to have. I had it for years. You know, honey will last indefinitely. In fact, honey is one of those side note things that you can put into food storage because it might crystallize, but it's got such powerful natural antibacterial properties that the shelf life is almost indefinite. So it's one of the things I love about putting honey over something like little chunks of Osha root that you can dip a spoon in, get one little chunk of it covered in honey, and honey makes the medicine go down. the perfection of that is so perfect. In fact, if you've ever done that, I would love to know what your experience with it is. And is it something you love? Is it something it's still a little bit tough for the medicine to go down? I think Osha root is super tasty. I don't want to eat large amounts of it, but I think it's super, super yummy. And I'm just a person who loves the taste of some of these hardcore medicinal plants, and especially roots, because they contain all of these tannins and these kind of volatile oils that give them the power that they have. This is something I just truly love. A final thought on this is this: if modern people feel that Osha is less potent today, what the folklore would say about this is it's because the relationship has thinned. Okay. The plant is still powerful, but listens less readily when it's approached without reverence. And this is one of those plants I really feel that applies to, because plants that are on this level where there's not a lot of it and you don't need very much of it, and it grows only in certain places that's hard to get to because not a lot of people can climb up a mountain to go grab it. It's hard to identify because it's very easily mistaken with other plants. If you really think about that, it's like, okay, we're going to put something that looks like Osha next to something that looks like poison hemlock, and one could kill you and one could heal you. So again, this is one of those things that if you really look at the healing power and the properties, this is where indigenous wisdom, deep, deep respect for the land and the plants comes in. And it's one of my favorite things about plants in general, plant medicine, and the simple, beautiful power of something like Osha root. So I would love to know what you think of this plant. Have you experienced it? If you have been using our lung blend, you will know that this is something that is just a beautiful, beautiful feeling. You could, in fact, to me, this is one of the things that you can actually taste in there. That and there's some peppermint in there as well. Peppermint is in the lowest percentage. Osha is in the highest percentage in this blend. But you can taste the Osha, and especially if you know what you're tasting. So I would love to know what you think about this. Is this one of your favorites? Is this brand new to you? And what do you think about some of the things that I shared about it? I would love to know. So thanks for tuning in today, guys, and we will see you in the next one.